Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see so many of you back from your tours. I'm pleased that you made it back, and I've just been around the audience, and it sounds like you had the most amazing time. So I've got just one question for you that relates to this. Are you in a good mood? Oh, so we can finish the talk now then. But our mood, it depends on lots of different things, doesn't it? And sometimes we don't, like for being on this fantastic ship, doing this fantastic day we've had today, we can see why. But sometimes, do you ever wake up in a bad mood? Or do you ever feel in a bad mood and you don't know what the reason is? Well, that's what we're going to delve into today. And so many things influence our mood. I'm not for one moment suggesting that it's only going to be our diet, but how we think, feel and behave in our energy levels. It turns out that actually diet is one of food and drink, our diet is one of the things that influences it. And this is all really quite recent research. When I trained as a dietitian, we didn't have any modules on how food affects the brain at all. So most of the stuff I'm going to present is really quite recent research. And it's a really hot topic at the moment, as you can imagine. Post-pandemic, there's a lot of focus, a lot of interest on how we can raise the mood of our young people and our older people and the people that were suffering during the pandemic. So I think it's quite a topical subject to talk about. And as I said, it's really hot. It's in the press a lot. So what I did just for a bit of fun was I went through some of the newspapers from around the world and I cut out some of the headlines that related to this topic that I thought might make you smile. So we had berries, the new mood-boosting superfood. The problem is with these headlines, we don't often know whether they're true or not, do we? So that was one of the British papers. Your mother was right, fish is brain food. That was another one. I can't remember which newspaper that came from. It's official, chocolate is the key to your happiness. Do you think that might be true? We've got lots of optimistic people in this audience, haven't we? And then the final one was a bit of a surprise. Eat breakfast if you want to put a smile on your face. That was actually from, I think, US, one of the American papers anyway. So it hits the news headlines all the time, this research. But I'm really going to delve into today what actually is based on evidence, because we don't want to be doing something that isn't going to make a difference, do we? And one of the top researchers in this field, he's normally very, very sort of restrained in what he says about what we can claim about diet and mood. But he's now saying there is compelling evidence showing a link between diet and mental health. So that's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it? A compelling evidence. And it's gone in the last 30 years from us not realising there was any link to actually realising that there's quite a compelling link. So I'll be very interested to know what you think. I've had such lovely chats with people around the ship who've commented me about some of the research that I've shown about their thoughts about it. So let me know at the end what you think, whether you find this evidence compelling. Now, those of you who've been to my talks before, welcome back, but also welcome to any new faces. Those of you who've been before will know that I don't like to do all the work. So I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of audience participation just to get us thinking about this topic of mood and food. So I am going to put up some pictures of different foods, and I'd like you to vote. Please feel free to sit it out if you're tired after a long tour. But I'd like you to put your hand up if you think it's mood boosting or mood busting. And it's not as easy as it sounds. But we'll start off with this one. This is actually oats, porridge oats or granola oats. Who thinks that's mood boosting? Quite a few people. Anybody think that's mood busting? No, okay. Berries, was that headline true? Are berries mood boosting? Oh, lots of people. Anybody think they're busting? Get more difficult as we go on. What about fish? Was that headline true? Who thinks fish is mood boosting? Yeah, anybody think fish is mood busting? No. All right, we've done pretty well so far. How about water? Something as simple as water. Mood boosting? Mood busting. Okay. Now then, alcohol. We're getting a bit more difficult now. Who thinks that's mood boosting? Not very many. Who thinks that's mood busting? A lot more. All right. All the answers will be in the talk as we go through. Chocolate. Was that true? Mood boosting? Gosh, there's a lot of optimism in this audience. Mood busting. All right, nobody for mood busting. And then the final one's tricky. Coffee. Mood boosting? Mood busting? I like that. That split the audience 50-50. Okay, well, we had a bit of a split on some of those. So as I say, all the answers will be in the talk. I'll be mentioning all these foods and a few others as well. Now, before we get into those, I just want to show you an analogy, because I think this is quite helpful. This is a car, obviously, and it's got on there all the different things that you need. So the petrol or the gas, the oil, brake fluid, antifreeze, water. The car needs a lot of different things to make it function normally. And if it's missing one of those, it's not going to work optimally. And the reason I picked it is because I actually think the brain works in a very similar way. It needs a lot of different nutrients to function. So it needs carbohydrate and fibre, which might be the equivalent of the gas or the fuel, the petrol. Omega-3 fats, which I know you will have heard about from either my other talks or you might know about it generally, might be the equivalent to the oil. And then we've got vitamins and minerals, especially B vitamins, zinc, selenium, polyphenols, protein and fluid. Now, you do not need to remember all of those by any means. The only reason I want to put that in there is to show you how complicated the brain is. It actually needs a lot of different things to make it function. But I am going to translate those into foods. What are the really good foods that we can eat in terms of our mood, in terms of brain function and in particular mood? Now, this is a great trivia question. I've seen it asked on a ship's trivia team before. But the question is, which organ in the body is only 2% of body weight but uses 20% of our nutrients? And of course, the answer is the brain. So 2% of body weight, but 20% of all our energy, all our vitamins, minerals, protein. It's one of those organs that is phenomenally active. It's really demanding nutritionally. So actually, it is not surprising that if our diet isn't good, our brain is likely to suffer. And there are three key ways in which the diet can influence the brain and in turn influence mood. And the first of these is in terms of structure. So nutrients are needed to make different brain cells. It's in terms of function. So have you all heard of these happy neurotransmitters, things like serotonin and dopamine? We actually need to make them every day. Those are the things that make us feel good. But the baseline chemical for making those comes from our diet. So they're a brain hormone, really, but they're a feel-good, have a feel-good effect. And then, of course, food is fuel. 20% of our daily fuel. So it's a hungry organ, isn't it? It's not going to work properly if we haven't got sufficient fuel. But there is a third and fascinating and really new way in which our diet can affect our brain. And I expect you can probably guess what I'm going to show you. But this is via gut bacteria. We hear so much about this, don't we? In my field of nutrition, it was the area with the biggest number of publications last year was this area of the gut microbiome and how it affects our health. It's massive, and it's really quite new. We now know there is a two-way connection between our brain and our gut, involving nerves and hormones. And our gut health can affect our brain health. Our brain can affect our gut. So you know that feeling of butterflies in the stomach when you're anxious or nervous about something. That's that system in operation. But also some of that serotonin, a really surprisingly large amount of that serotonin, is made by the gut bacteria in our gut. And the bacteria, our gut is affected by what we eat. So 3 major ways: structure, function, and the gut bacteria. So using all that information, I'm going the wrong way. Using all that information, I've trawled through the research. Now, this was probably the most difficult talk to put together because I was sat there at my desk with this absolutely enormous research pile of papers on how the different dietary factors and different gut bacteria affect our mood. And I thought I need to narrow this down to something that's really practical, really helpful. And what are the most important things? So a bit like one of my other talks, I think it was the superfoods of Central America, I've got it down to 4 mood-boosting tips. And my hope today is that there's one or maybe more than one that you aren't doing, or that you find that you are doing them. And sometimes, as I said earlier, that the best thing from a nutrition talk is to actually know that you are already on the right track. But I have to say, I generally find people will come up to me afterwards and say, I'm doing quite a lot of that, but I'm not doing this one or I'm not doing that one. So I think there will be some new ones and some surprising ones. Tip number 1 is about including some specific foods that we know have got the nutrients that are mood boosting. So remember that picture of the car and the brain, that analogy. So which foods have got specific evidence for them for being mood boosting? And number 1 is fruit and vegetables. I did a whole session on fruit and vegetables yesterday, and I only lightly touched on the mood aspects. But there's a very strong observational correlation between good mental health and high fruit and vegetable consumption in populations around the world. And it's actually equivalent to the impact of physical activity on mood. And most of us will be aware that that's quite a strong link. Being physically active is a real mood booster. The fruit and veg consumption is on a level with that. And why? Well, we saw yesterday, and those of you who came to my talk, fibre, vitamins, minerals, polyphenols. Polyphenols are often the colours in plant foods, but they're essential for our health. So it could be any combination. We don't really know what it is, but a very strong link. And yesterday, I mentioned in terms of longevity a phenomenon called the power of purple. This actually also relates to mood. And I'm just going to show you one study. I always try and pick out just one good study for each of these areas. This was a study looking at the impact of purple fruits and vegetables on mood. And it was a very recent study, and they used the berry drinks as their intervention in this experimental study. They tested mood at the start, and they tested mood 2 hours after drinking the berry. And they had a placebo, which was dyed to look the same, but didn't actually contain the polyphenols. But the participants didn't know which one they were getting. And what they found is that the berry drinks increased brain function, positive thinking and mood, but the placebo didn't. It was really quite phenomenal. And this study was published. It was also on television. I don't know if anybody saw it. It was on British television, and I think they showed it in the States as well. But very, very strong intervention and a very, very quick response to it. So really quite phenomenal. So you remember yesterday as well, I said any of these purple fruit and vegetables would be okay as well. So we've got red cabbage, red onion, aubergine, red cauliflower. I showed you this slide yesterday. Do you remember what those are? Down the bottom? The purple potatoes. Yeah. But they've all got the particular anthocyanins that are in blueberries in them, so they're all very, very good. So that's the number one nutrient. The second one is on fish, a food with mood-boosting nutrients in it. And again, it's a population correlation. Populations with higher intakes of fish, generally speaking, have higher happiness levels in the population. So whenever they do World Mood Happiness Reports, it's often countries like Scandinavia and Japan that come out being top. Now, again, it's not only going to be down to the fish, but probably the fish is one of those factors. And fish is rich in nutrients linked to mood, like vitamin D, which helps to boost serotonin, and omega-3 fats. So really, really good, packed full of nutrients, not just in terms of aging and heart disease, but also in terms of mood. And here's a picture of the brain. I said I would delve into this in a little bit more detail. The brain is actually very high in omega-3 fat. Sometimes people think the brain is made of protein, but actually it's a very high percentage fat, and a very big part of that is the omega-3 fat. And much of that is in the frontal lobe there, the area that affects our mood. So there's a good biological reason why omega-3 fat might be important. This is one of those test tube studies that I showed some of you the other day, where you put brain cells in a test tube and you look at the impact of the omega-3. And I don't know how well you can see that. As I said, this screen is one of the clearest I've ever used, but I really think that does show there. That's quite good. So we've got brain cells in a test tube without omega-3 and brain cells in a test tube with omega-3. And as you can see, that the omega-3 is really important in terms of making connections between the different brain cells. So absolutely vital. So there's a good biological reason. The brain is high in it. And we can see that omega-3 helps to actually make connections as well. So I would say the evidence is pointing towards that being true. Fish is a brain food. And the recommended intake is the same as it is for general health. 2 portions of fish a week, at least one of which should be an oily fish. So that might be salmon, mackerel, trout, sardines, pilchards, herring, snapper. There's lots and lots of them. Again, unfortunately, supplements don't seem to be as good. So either fish body oil supplements or plant supplements are not as good in terms of mood benefit. So is it something else in the fish as well that may be important? A bit like I was talking about yesterday. On my very last slide, I've got a link to different plant sources, a place where you can go to have a look at those. So the supplements and the plant sources are better than nothing, but preferably having it as the fish. So we've got fruit and vegetables, we've got fish. What about chocolate? There was a lot of people stuck their hand up and said mood boosting. Well, it's quite interesting, the chocolate story. Probably we can give it a tick for mood boosting, but let me show you a few caveats around that. It has to be the high cocoa solids chocolate, which I know we've sampled several times on this trip, haven't we? On my tour yesterday, I think we got given some 80% cocoa solids chocolate. It was delicious. But that's the one that's high in polyphenols. Milk chocolate and white chocolate is not particularly high, but the dark chocolate has got that cacao bean in it, which is rich in polyphenols. And those polyphenols have actually now been shown to enhance the gut bacteria, which promote good mood. So there is a good biological reason. And chocolate has been shown to improve brain health and mental fatigue in older adults. So that, again, another good reason why we might need that. So there's some really supportive information. The other thing was it has the ideal mouthfeel. It's the perfect mix of carbohydrate and fat to give our brain pleasure. Now that's really quite phenomenal. There's not many foods that have got that ideal mix of fat and carbohydrate. In fact, there's only 2 other foods that have got the same balance of fat and carbohydrate. Because I know this audience is so good, I'm going to ask you if you can guess what the other 2 foods are. So a real high level of fat, a high level of carbohydrate give pleasure when we eat it. Do you want to have a guess, anybody? Pardon? Hamburger? No, that's high in fat, but there's not any carbohydrate. No. That's got both fat and carbohydrate, but it isn't quite in the right balance to hit that area of the brain. Sugar? No, sugar's pure carbohydrate. No, that's got high fat but no sugar. Whoa, well done, that lady. We got there in the end. Those were all good guesses. They're all pleasurable foods, aren't they? But ice cream. What about the second one? It's a bit of a trick because it's not a food we have as adults. Pardon? Yes, breast milk or infant formula. So not cow's milk particularly, that's not particularly pleasurable, but the carbohydrate content of breast milk and infant formula is actually quite high. So obviously we're programmed, aren't we, from infancy to enjoy that balance of fat and carbohydrate. Anyway, that was just an aside, but pretty good guessing there. So there has now been research, and I said to some of you that earlier in the sessions that I always have my favourite study in every lecture I give, and this is actually my favourite study in my mood and food talk. So this is the chocolate study, and it's a group of participants, and they are randomly allocated. This is a real university-done study. They are randomly allocated to eat chocolate quickly, eat chocolate but savour it, or have crackers. Which group do you want to be in? Yeah. Oh, you'd like to be in the crackers group. Oh, the chocolate savouring. Yeah. Okay. Well, fortunately, they don't get to choose in this research. They're randomly allocated. And what they then did was they compared mood before and after. And they actually did this properly. I've always brought every single study down to its real basics. But if you delved into it, you see this is done really very, very carefully. And they use proper mood questionnaires to actually measure these. So they compared mood before and after. What they found was that crackers had no effect. Chocolate boosted mood, but only if it was savoured. So it's not just the polyphenols, is it? It's going to be something to do with that amazing mouthfeel of the combination of fat and sugar that gives us pleasure as well. But there's some bad news. Only a small piece was needed. 6 squares was no better than 3 squares. You weren't any happier after 6 squares. You only needed a little bit, which harks back to some of my earlier studies, doesn't it, that I mentioned about the sharing desserts. So that's the bad news. But I think we can give chocolate a tick, can't we, if it's the high cocoa solids chocolate and we savour it. And I've got a cartoon just to illustrate that. I love that. I'm a complex person with many moods, but they all require chocolate. Love the sight of that chocolate. So tip number 2 was, this will surprise you, I would guess, but it's about choosing some smart carbohydrates. Now, do you remember I said 20% of our fuel intake, or around 450 calories per day, is needed just to keep the brain going? And the brain prefers carbohydrate to any other fuel. It can't use protein or fat directly. Carbohydrate is the number one fuel for the brain. And carbohydrate actually also helps to boost the happy neurotransmitters as well. We need a regular supply of carbohydrate in our diet. Now, sometimes people say to me, but surely it's protein. We've often heard about this idea of something called tryptophan, because tryptophan is used to make the neurotransmitters. But let me show you this complicated bit of physiology that the researchers have found out. I'll try and explain it as well as I can, but it is quite new and quite complicated, I found. So tryptophan is an amino acid, and sure enough, it is needed to make serotonin. But it's found in loads of different protein foods. It's in fish, chicken, eggs, nuts, seeds. We're not generally speaking low on tryptophan. What carbohydrate does when we have it with tryptophan is it stimulates the release of insulin, which is really useful because insulin takes out other amino acids from our blood as it's going around the body and leaves a high level of tryptophan going up to the brain, which actually means that a higher amount of tryptophan can cross into the brain. It's got less competition. So it's actually the carbohydrate with the tryptophan that is the thing that is so important. So that is, again, as I said, quite recent elucidation of how particular nutrients interact to affect it. So it's not the tryptophan we're worried about, it's the carbohydrate. And the first study that actually highlighted this was some research done at Arizona State University. And they were not looking at mood and food in particular. They were doing a weight loss study. And they were comparing a low carbohydrate diet called the Atkins diet. Does anybody know that one? Yeah. Okay, so it's got lots of protein foods in it, lots of fat, but very low carbohydrate, compared with a low-fat diet, which had quite a good amount of carbohydrate. What they found was that both groups lost the same amount of weight if they could follow the diet. That was the tricky part, was it wasn't the diet itself, it was whether people could keep to it, which is the hard part. But they found out they were doing lots of questionnaires alongside the weight loss. And one of the questionnaires they were doing was monitoring people's mood. And what they found was that the low carbohydrate dieters showed much greater mood swings, much greater irritability, much greater tiredness. So they suffered a lot more for that weight loss. Has anybody tried the Atkins diet? And no, nobody in this room. Okay, well, I've got quite a few patients that have done, and I would say that's very, very true. So this is where it became apparent that the carbohydrate was so important. And Randy Glasbergen, my cartoonist, has got something to say that. The lady saying I was on the low carbohydrate diet for a week and I lost 3 inches off my smile. That was pretty much what that study showed, really. So what are the smart carbohydrates? Well, they're also known as low glycemic index carbohydrates sometimes. You might know them as low GI. And they provide a slow, steady supply of blood sugar to the brain. That's what we want. We want that brain to be provided with carbohydrate continuously as the fuel, and also to take out the other amino acids so the tryptophan can go in. So it's a slow, steady supply of sugar to the brain. And there's a high GI food in red. That might be something like sugar. There's a low GI food, and I'm going to show you some examples of low GI foods. That's what we want. We don't want it to go up and then come dramatically down. We want it to stay at a nice even level. So let me show you some low GI foods and see if there's anything in here that you like. So the first group is whole grains, so things like granary bread, rye bread, seeded bread. Oats. So those of you who said oats were mood boosting, absolutely right. Oats, muesli, granola. All types of pasta have also got a low GI. In terms of potatoes, it's new potatoes and sweet potatoes are the lowest GI. Most types of fruit and vegetables, almost all, there's the odd exception, but almost all have got a low GI. So it's another benefit of fruit and vegetables. And then beans and lentils, all of them have got a low GI. So there's quite a few foods that I mentioned elsewhere in my series of talks, aren't there, that seem to do multiple things in the body, have multiple benefits. So these are the best types of carbohydrate. So a good idea to include some type of low GI carbohydrate into your diet. The other thing about those foods is they are also rich in something called prebiotics. Have you heard of that term? Yeah. What it generally means is it is the food for the gut bacteria. It promotes the growth of good gut bacteria. And I've already mentioned how important they are in terms of the brain, even though they're quite a long way from the brain. There are now some fascinating studies that have been done. And I've just picked out a little bit here and I've simplified it a bit. There are animal studies transferring fecal samples from humans who have depression, so transferring the gut bacteria from humans with depression into animals. And what happens is the animals start to become anxious, lose their interest in pleasurable activities, so start to show some of the signs of low mood that have been demonstrated by the humans. So there's something very powerful about the composition of the gut microbiome affecting the brain. So this has been replicated now. You might have even seen this. New Scientist and Time magazine both featured it as such a fascinating bit of information. What we do know is that a regular and diverse intake of plant foods is the single most important influence on our gut microbiome. So I think this field is going to grow in the next few years. We're maybe going to know exactly which bacteria are more important. Maybe that will start to influence medication, whatever. But at the moment, the state of information is that we know that varied and good quantities of plant foods will impact it as well. So a lot of those low GI foods are packed full of these prebiotics as well. Number 3, yes, it was true, water. I think you all said true when I'd mentioned that. Keeping well hydrated. The brain is actually 75% water. So once we're dehydrated, it starts to have quite an impact on our brain. So even mild dehydration will impair mood, increase fatigue, and especially as we get older, we're more at risk because our thirst mechanism is a little bit less effective. And the study I've shown you here to illustrate this is a lady in a driving simulator. And what they're doing is they're looking at how well her brain is functioning to make decisions about driving when she's hydrated and when she's dehydrated. And they repeat this on lots of different people in their hydrated and dehydrated state. And in general, people make twice the errors in terms of concentration and driving when they're dehydrated. And it's actually equivalent to the upper legal level of blood alcohol, having been dehydrated. So hydration, absolutely vital for brain function. What do those colours represent? Yeah, I could hear some people saying it. Yeah, big clue. Colour of urine. This is actually quite a useful indicator to show if you're well hydrated and in turn whether your brain's likely to be functioning. Now, I think I mentioned in one of my earlier studies that I work in a men's prison where I live back home in the UK. And the prison, because there's such a strong impact between what people eat and drink, how they feel, behave, how they deal with stress, the prison service in the UK funds some sessions for prisoners to learn how to eat better and to cook better. And I was going in a lot every week before COVID. I used to do this. And I always used to put this chart onto the table and say to my group of male prisoners, what do you think that represents? And there would be all sorts of guesses, but usually they would guess it was urine colour. But there was one time I was doing it, I put it down, and one of the prisoners said to me quite seriously, oh, it's a paint chart for what colour I can have my cell redecorated. I just loved that. I say, no, you can't choose the colour of your cell. Anyway, it does look like a paint chart, but it's a P chart. And the other place where I use it is I work at the London Marathon, and I'm usually there at the start of the London Marathon asking people to check their urine colour to make sure they're well hydrated. And one year I had the man who was the oldest British man to run the London Marathon, and he came up to me, looked at the chart, and he pointed to number 7. And he said, yep, that's me, number 7. And I said, gosh, are you sure? Do you think you should be running? And he said, no, I've always taken my tea like that with 2 sugars. And he thought it was a T chart rather than a P chart. So I quite liked that as well. Anyway, diversion. What we want to be is one of the top 3, pale straw colour. Or as one of the surgeons that I work with always says, he says, don't use the word pale straw, Sue Darling. He said, use the colour of champagne. So you can choose what you want, colour of champagne or pale straw. And, the sorts of amounts we need, this idea of 6 to 8 cups or mugs is actually reasonable. It's a reasonable rule of thumb. We need more if it's hot or if we're doing exercise. But generally speaking, that's quite a good rule of thumb. It doesn't have to just be water. Tea counts, herb tea, milk, low-calorie drinks, fizzy drinks, squash, fruit juice. They all actually count towards that total. What about tea and coffee, though? Because that was the one that split the audience most, wasn't it? They count for fluid. And coffee also contains polyphenols, and so does tea. And caffeine actually can boost mood and alertness, can't it? That's why we take it. So there is some benefit from caffeine. Tea has got another stimulant in it called L-theanine, which has actually been shown to be mood enhancing. So that idea of having a cup of tea when we're under stress, that us British do all the time, based on evidence. And studies have now shown that coffee is linked to a mood boost, especially if we have it in the morning, within the first 2 hours of waking. It's much less benefit if we drink it in the afternoon, but there does seem to be a positive mood boost from coffee. So it's not surprising that that split the audience. The problem is, though, that those effects can be by raising dopamine levels, so there's a really good biological reason. But the problem is, more than about 4 cups of coffee a day can start to increase anxiety, irritability, and withdrawal, and to disturb our sleep, which in turn will impact our mood, won't it? So it's one of those things where it's a bit of a balancing act. The same is true about alcohol. That sort of split the audience, didn't it? So here's my seesaw. It's pleasurable and relaxing in moderation. There is good evidence that alcohol is a mood booster in moderation. The problem is that high intakes actually impact on some of the neurotransmitters in our brain. So high levels of intake, above what you would call the safe upper levels. In the UK, we call it units. In the US, I think you call it standard drinks, don't you? So it's above that level will start to impact on mood. So again, it's like the coffee. A little bit is good, but a lot might be having an impairment. But I think I read somewhere that this idea of restricting standard drinks doesn't apply on a cruise. Did you read that? Did you read it? Oh, yeah, it wasn't just me, yeah. But it definitely has an impact on mood. So good, we've gone through, sorry, my clicker is really sticky today. We've gone through three tips, my final tip here in the last 2 minutes. Embrace breakfast. This probably comes as a surprise, but breakfast eaters have greater amounts of mood-boosting nutrients, and that brain needs that fuel. And there's now studies that show people who eat breakfast deal with stress better in the workplace. So that's quite phenomenal. It does not have to be first thing. It has to be somewhere in that window of 2 hours, within 2 hours of waking. So if you're not a breakfast eater, that might be a tip you can put in. So we've looked at these tips all separately. I'm just going to show you very quickly 2 studies where we start to put all of this together. And they're 2 very different studies, but each of them tells us something useful. Now this first one, very recently published, this is an amazing piece of observational nutrition data that I was talking about. This is diet and mood measured in 36,000 people over several years, done in several different countries. Can you imagine the amount of data that they have put together in this study? But it showed us something really useful. What it showed us, they took out the influence of other lifestyle things on mood, such as money and family situation. They were just looking at the influence of diet. Those following diet containing the foods I've mentioned, so fruit and vegetables, fish, low GI carbs, plenty of fluid, these people that were following the diets that were higher in these things rated significantly better mood levels over the course of the lifetime. So it's a correlation, it doesn't prove it, but there's a very strong link between those sorts of dietary foods that I've been talking about and lifetime mood. Now, there was a very interesting twist to this as well. The greatest benefit was between a really poor diet with hardly any of those foods and a moderately good diet. That was a big, big difference in terms of the mood of people over the course of their life. There was a little bit extra when you went from moderately good to perfect, but it was much smaller. The biggest benefit was between poor and moderately good. So this tells me we do not have to be perfect. This tells me we just need to put in some of those good foods in terms of mood boost. And then the final study is an intervention study, an experimental study, a bit like a drug trial. And this was the first one that was ever done. It was done in Australia. I don't think we've got anybody from Australia in the audience. I've not met anybody anyway. And it was really groundbreaking. What they did was they took people with a moderate level of depression. And the treatment that they gave them, obviously they all had their normal medication, their normal amount of therapy, but they divided them in half, and half had advice to improve their diet and support to improve their diet with the fish, the whole grains, the beans, the fruit, the vegetables, all of these different foods, and half didn't have any dietary change. And it was just a 12-week study. It was quite a short time. And what they did was measure changes in terms of people's mood with your medication and your therapy staying the same. And it was absolutely quite amazing what happened. The significantly reduced depression scores in the improved diet group, much, much lower than purely the medication and the therapy on its own. And it was the first time anybody had shown that with an actual intervention study, and I don't know if you can see it on the graph at the bottom. And the level of symptom reduction correlated with the level of improvement of diet. So greater reduction in symptoms, the more dietary factors people put in. So there's a lot of extra support around the overall diet, isn't there, in terms of our mood and food. So final thoughts. We don't have the whole story yet. It's such a new area. But I think there's quite a lot of very interesting studies, and there's enough information out there now for us to think about a few different things that might really be quite useful, a few changes we could make. Your diet can change structure, function, and influence mood. And it can be a really good tool alongside things like medication or therapy or sleep or stress management or doing more physical activity. It's now starting to become one of those ones that that people are recommending. Psychiatrists are actually recommending it, so it's that powerful. But even just to keep our mood, even not depressed, but just to keep our mood high. So there's my 4 tips in one place. Foods with mood-boosting nutrients, smart carbs, hydration, and breakfast. So my final question to you is, are there any of those you could incorporate back home? And I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute, because this has got the free-to-download information. They've got food leaflets in there, they've got food fact sheets in there purely on mood and food. But I've added at the bottom here, you see that book, Brain Changer, by Professor Jacka? That was the person that did the Australian SMILES study, the first ever trial. And I think that's a really good book. She in the book, she describes as to why she started getting interested in this area and how she designed that intervention trial to improve mood, and then goes on to describe a bit more information about all the different foods. So free to download food fact sheets, the 4th thing, a book that you can buy by Professor Jacka. It's a few years old now, but it's still really, really good. This was my last talk on this cruise, so I just very briefly want to thank you all for coming. It's been so nice meeting you and seeing you around the ship as well with all your great questions. And I'd really like to thank the technical team as well for the lighting and sound and helping me out every single time with the tech. And I'll see you either later today or tomorrow, but I won't be doing any more talks. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll be up the back if you want to ask any questions.